welcome to the morning program, The Dailies, where we keep you updated with all that's happening in Nigeria from our Nigerian newspaper. I am Sada Elisha Dasham. I'll be doing the program alongside Rachel Tanzi. Good morning.
Morning, Sally.
How you doing?
I'm fine. How about you?
Splendid. I'm fine. Thank you so much. And to viewers at home, please do remember you can follow us live on Facebook. Drop your comment, your views on any of the story that is of interest to you. This morning we have quite a number of stories that are actually of interest, so we would love to hear your own views on that story. Well, let us go into the papers, starting with the Vanguard newspaper.
On the Vanguard newspaper, the big story is sub-regional forces working to destabilize Nigeria. A statement from presidency. The writer under the story says, go after sponsors of terror. Afenifere charges Tinubu. ECOWAS experts move against terror financing, money laundering. I hid in a shrub like a snake to escape from abductors. This is coming from Kuriga student. Bandits demand 40 trillion naira ransom for 16 abducted Kaduna residents. 40 trillion naira. That is more than the Nigerian budget. You can find details on page 5. On energy crisis, federal government orders NERC to revoke licenses of non-performing discos. Edo Guba stakeholders seek urgent resolution of Obaseki Shaibu feud. You can find details on page 7. UBA African Guarantee Fund partner on $100 million loan support for African SMEs. And on Ramadan, Abba's governors OB orders urge unity and prayers for Nigeria. President Tinubu renews hope for oil and gas sector with bold directives. And then we have some of the things he plans on doing. Potential to generate up to 1 BCT per day, incremental domestic gas supply, and create 2.3 million jobs. Directives aim to shorten Nigeria's oil and gas contracting cycle from 38 months to global standards of 6 months, or less than 6 months, to speed up production of oil and gas. Fiscal incentives have the potential to attract up to $17.5 billion in new oil and gas investments. Directives seek to reduce operating costs for oil and gas operations in Nigeria, which currently exceed global standards by up to 40%. Enhanced security measures across the Niger Delta have delivered increased revenue from LNG export. Cargoes have grown from an average of 16 in 2023 to 21 in the first quarter of 2024. Oil production has risen from 1.22 million barrels per day in the second quarter of 2023 to 1.6 million barrels per day in the first quarter of 2024, meaning we will be able to achieve the estimated income to be able to finance the budget for 2024. And that's all news on Vanguard newspaper.
On the Blueprint newspaper, gunmen kill 7 in Plateau Market. Weakness admits Mefele didn't confer corrupt advantage on self. It's a news you can find inside the paper. UBA African Guarantee Fund creates synergy to support SMEs. And also we are having Tinubu order release of seized food trucks to owners, where we have a writer here saying Kano governor begs for reopening of borders, renew hope agenda working. Buhari, we have Buhari, Remi, Tinubu. You can find more detail of that on page 28 of the Blueprint newspaper. Still on the issue of the budget pardoning, Ninge insists 3.7 trillion naira not traceable to the projects, and we looked into that yesterday. You can find more detail of that story inside the paper. Jimo Ibrahim calls for arrest Northern senators, disown lawmaker. Still, you can find that story inside the paper. And we are still having the President Tinubu renew hope for oil and gas sector with bold directive, which we already saw in the earlier paper. And we have 30 trillion naira ways and means do a thorough job. Apabio charges probe committee. More detail of that can be found on page 6 of the paper, and that's all on Blueprint newspaper.
On this day newspaper from the federal government, we are not sleeping on worsening power supply. Proposed capital punishment for electricity thieves, asset vandals. Adelabu warns heads of agencies, says he will ensure their removal before his sack. You can start with the details on the front page. Buhari alerts Tinubu, says Nigeria complex to govern. SSANU, NASU to begin strike Monday over with health salaries and wage increase. Afenifere to Tinubu, no more excuses, go after terrorists. Bandits demand 40 trillion naira, 11 Hilux vans, 150 motorcycles to release Kaduna victims. Gunmen invade Plateau Market and kill 7. You can find details on page 9. And Sele, I'm not surprised because the number of abducted people are high. And previously when this happened and we were talking about it, and I said, when you see a large number like this, you will definitely see an outrageous amount of ransom being required. Now, for me, these terrorists, are they haywire or something like that? Because this is almost more than the 2024 budget for Nigeria, which is not even yet fully funded. Where do you think or expect 40 trillion naira to be gotten? They know very well, except if they are very crazy, but they know very well that this is a money that cannot be gotten. They are putting people in a tight position where we will literally see these abductees staying in captivity for a very long time. The problem is not the money they are asking for, but the fact that they know this sum is impossible. This sum is impossible. It can't happen. This sum is impossible, and they will continue like this. And before we know it, these pupils and others that have been kidnapped are going to stay with them for a very, very long time until it gets to the point. I don't think they want to release them. If they want to release them, this is not the ransom for a kidnapper that wants to release its victim. This is not the ransom you give. We've seen ransom of 100 million. We've seen ransoms of 50 million, and people were able to come up with it. But when you're giving a ransom of 40 trillion naira, and if we are to read between the lines, these people are just saying we don't have the intention of releasing this student because this is an outrageous demand. And nobody can come up with it. Not even the federal government of Nigeria can come up with this money. Not the entire country can come up with it. And all of that. And then I am worried because this now says that these students are going to be in captivity for a while. Except we have our army and every security agency on full force on ground running some secret mission to release these children in a way that they will be able to come back to their families unharmed, without casualties and all of that, unless the government is trying to pull something like this. But this demand says we don't plan on releasing these children. And I'm just waiting to see what the federal government will say about it. What will be their approach and what will be the end result of this, because now this gives room for negotiation, and this is one of the things we are trying to eliminate. On what grounds are we negotiating with these people? What do we owe them that we will stand and negotiate with the bandits and terrorists and people who have nothing to get from the government, and the government owes them nothing? What are we going to do? So I'm just waiting to see what tactics, how tactical or what way is the government going to go about these abducted school children, these bandits and their demands, and what will be the result at the end of the day.
Rachel, this amount, just like you said, it's really, really outrageous. And you already mentioned the fact that they are aware that the government cannot afford this. And of course, they are calling for negotiation. But Rachel, what were you expecting when we did not have a government, or our leaders have refused to be proactive when it comes to handling this issue? Richard, at first, when they started, it was more like it was just a farmers' headers clash. It will go away soon. I believe that was the thought. the government then had. It didn't go. It just kept changing faces.
Yeah.
And then from headers, it was now Boko Haram. It now became headers, it now became ISWAP, however you want to call them, and then kidnappers. And then they kept changing name, but they are one and the same. And it took the government a lot of years before they actually pronounced them as a terrorist group. I remember how Nigerians kept pushing and canvassing and saying, you know what, we need to label these people as a terrorist group. Instead, we saw them calling IPOP terrorists. Meanwhile, you and I know that in as much as what IPOP is doing is very wrong, but they actually brought to the table what they wanted from the government. Now, those are the people I'm expecting the government to call them for negotiation and for a roundtable and for a dialogue to say, you know what, why don't we stay together as a country? Because united, we can actually fight this common enemy, regardless of who they are. But here we are having a government that decided to be pampering these people. And then there was a time where we saw kidnapping, and then we saw various governors coming and say, you know what, do not pay ransom, do not pay this.
We saw Rufai championing that.
Course, but then we saw when these people took, the law into their hands, and they were killing their adoptees.
Yeah, we saw that.
It took parents so much. I clearly remember that of the Greenfield. Parents had to put themselves together to actually come up with the amount of money. And then when the government finally decided to send vehicles to bring them, the government wanted to take the glory. And I clearly remember a parent, which I'm very familiar with, refused and said, give me my daughter, I'm taking her to the hospital. Where were you all this while when we needed you to actually come to our aid? You were not there. And right now that we're able to come up with the money, you want to take the glory for that? In no way is it going to happen. That happened in Kaduna State. So now why am I becoming a little bit emotional at this point? Is because what I am not surprised that these bandits, or they are not bandits because they are beyond bandits. I mean, taking a look at the picture on the first paper, the Vanguard, you could see that these people are Rachel Tata, but then you need to look at the sophisticated weapons they are using. You wonder who is sponsoring them. Rachel, they can afford 40 trillion naira. Those bandits have what it takes. Put together all the weapons they're having there. It's way above 40 trillion naira. They're even having the guts to ask for 11 Hilux cars. How much is one,
motorcycles?
How much is one Hilux? Let's even start from the Hilux. How much is one? We're complaining how much it's taking custom. A lot of people have abandoned their cars at the port because they cannot afford to clear a Camry Toyota. And here you're asking for Hilux. We saw where they were even asking for spaghetti. You even have the guts to order for such a thing. So I think that the government have been playing for long, and it's high time that they bring out their horns and actually break. Let us lock horns together and let those people know that, the government is not here to joke. They are not beyond the government. So I'm just hoping that, you know what, let's stop seeing stories like this. Are we saying that it's only in Nigeria? Of course not. We have various countries that have various bodies of terrorist groups, but then we are seeing different approach. So I'm hoping that the government will actually wake up to something. 40 trillion, which you mentioned, is more than our budget. We're still having back and forth about 30 trillion naira ways and means. And there's still a probe. And here you're asking for 40 trillion naira. What's F13? So I'm just hoping that the government will actually do the right thing, because honestly, I'm just imagining the parents that are wondering about their wards, or am I going to talk about those in the IDP camps, and we don't even know what is happening to them presently. They have been chased from their ancestral ground, and they're right now, they can't even stay in the IDPs in peace. So I'm just hoping that, you know what, we really, really need to make the country safe for everybody, because even you and I are not safe. Every day you keep we are not. So I just hope that the government will make Nigeria safe for everybody, because it's just a matter of time we see parents withdrawing their wards from school because it's no longer safe for them again.
Still on this day newspaper, the big story: if governors provide land, I will solve farmers' headers clashes in 3 weeks. This is a statement coming from President Tinubu, urges quick payment of 30,000 naira wage award to ease workers' financial stress, called Bago Agric Revolution as bold step. We shall engender broad prosperity for our people, says Niger governor. You can start with the details on the front page, and then we have a picture story showing that agric revolution for food security. And that's all the news on this day newspaper.
A look at the leadership newspaper. I am ready to dialogue with bandits. If this is coming from Gumi, and we remember this is not the first time he has even taken photographs with this bandit at one point or the other. And here we're seeing he's giving possibly maybe he's given the reason why he can actually go back and actually dialogue with the bandits again. There was a time, Rachel, where we had Sheki Gumi coming out to say that, you know what, the only way we can solve these issues is we should have a ministry for these headers.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, we're going to have a ministry for headers. Let's also have a ministry for farmers.
Of course.
What is the use of the Ministry of Agriculture? Why do we have that ministry? So that it can body all these things together. So why are you saying that you actually need a ministry for you to stop this? So I'm just hoping that nobody is more Nigerian than the other. We've said this here a number of times and we'll keep repeating it. So I do not really know what the if is, but I believe that our viewers will be interested in the if. Reason why he will actually want to dialogue with the bandits. Again, you can find detail of that on page 30. And on Ramadan, we have 250,000 for a household benefit from Yaris Feeding Initiative that has been on the paper since yesterday. More detail on page 23. And on fact check, we have Tinubu order return of seized food items to the owners. Was trending, Nigeria lost 16,000 doctors to Japa syndrome. More detail on page 2. Tinubu pledges economic opportunities in livestock sector. You can start the detail on the front page and continue more on page 7. 3 trillion naira budget padding. More northern senators tackle Ninge. More detail on page 7. The big story: 10 years after bandits attacked 10 safe school scheme. With the rider, we prevented over 61 planned attacks on schools. This is coming from the NSCDC. We are not led agency board. This is coming from the defense. Police plan special protection squad. Community leader says bandit demanding 40 trillion naira as ransom for 16 Kaduna residents. Now we're seeing that they were even having the number for just 16 of them. So I wonder how much per head will actually go for. More detail of that can be found on page 4. Calls for more prayers, lower prices, harder Ramadan. This is more on that on page 30. Ex-ACF chair Gabriel Aduku dies at 80. More detail on page 30. UBA gets $100 million fund backing for women-led SMEs. You can find more inside the paper. And that's all on Leadership newspaper.
On Nigerian Tribune, the big story: alleged budget padding. Northern senators disown Ningi as crack widens. 3.7 trillion naira not traced in budget, Ningi insists. Arrest charge Ningi for breach of peace. Statement coming from Senator Jemo Ibrahim. You can find details on page 2. Bandits invade Plateau Market, kill 7. 4 days after abduction of our children, kidnappers yet to make contact. This is coming from parents. How I managed to escape. This is a pupil. You can find details on page 3. Kudos knocks as Oshun appoints new Owa of Ibajo. You can find details on page 4. Court affirms Barua as NURTW president, declares Abede-led caretaker committee illegal. Service year elongation bill. National Assembly staff members take up Pabio Speaker orders to industrial court. Senate inaugurates 17-man committee to probe Buhari's 22.7 trillion naira Ways and Means and Anchor Borrowers program. States should pay wage award now. This is a command from President Tinubu. UK bans overseas health workers from bringing dependents. You can find details on page 13. The UK is making this Japan thing more difficult for everybody, Nigerians including. We saw where they moved the minimum wage from 27 to over 37, over 10,000 pounds increase on what minimum wage the job if you get earn, you can eventually move. And now we're seeing that health workers cannot bring dependent. We saw that starting from students. If you're having a study, you can accept PhD. I think not even master. It was just for those doing their doctorate degree, and then. Now we're seeing that they are banning health workers from bringing their dependents, and then I think there should be more details to this. It might be put this way, but then there's for those who are planning to move out of the country, you should be able to start looking at these things. I think that the UK is just trying to minimize and curtail the excess movement we've seen in the past, where they've had challenges of having health workers with fake certificates and all of that. So I believe this is in the bid to make sure that it's not like that, and they are able to protect themselves also. So you can find details on page 30, and that's all the news on Nigerian Tribune.
On the Guardian newspaper, investors may forfeit dividends as firms struggle to survive. More detail on page 6, where we see companies exit will pull over 5 trillion naira from stock market. Shareholders are warning. And then shareholders on verge of losing investment in multinationals. We will recall, we saw that when a lot of multinationals are actually leaving the shores because of how it is very difficult for them to be able to market and make profit in the country. Still on the Guardian newspaper, bandits storm Plateau market, kill 7, abduct Chinese in Kwara State. Detail of that on page 7. Tinubu promises to fix farmers' headers crisis in 3 weeks, where we are he's saying that governors should actually give him the land, and he promised to actually solve the issue of headers and farmers clash in 3 weeks. And I'm just so confused on how he intends to do that. I think this is something that for a very, very long time we've been hoping something will be done, but possibly he has a different approach towards this, and that is why he believed that with the land. But the question will be the other lands that have been abandoned all these years, because a number of farmers have to abandon their farmlands because of the clash. What are the governors, or what is the president hoping to do with those abandoned lands already? Because if the condition is give me the land and I will solve the problem, that is to say you want to give some of the land to the headers. And we're seeing that farmers, these are lands that have been given to them by their forefathers, which they intend to protect. So people, that is the only thing they have to remember, their family, or their to be able to trace their ancestors and all of that. And then we're seeing here saying give me the land and then I'll be able to do that, because he's talking about giving a reorientation to headers about things they're supposed to do. We saw where some of the headers are coming out to see this land was given to them in so many years ago. And we know a lot of things have changed. I mean, some of these lands, there are buildings presently you need and all of that. So I mean, this is more than just the eye can see. But I'm hoping that however the approach the president should be, it should be that nobody will suffer eventually, but that everybody, just like I said, everybody is a Nigerian. Nobody's more Nigerian than the other. So we are hoping that this will be a fair play, that the president will do all that it takes so that we can have peace. That is what it will take for everybody to live in peace, and then we'll not be running into food insecurity, food crisis, and all of that. Let us just trust the president, hoping that he knows the best way to be able to tackle this eventually.
I honestly don't know what President Tinubu is trying to do concerning giving a condition. You will fix it in 3 weeks if governors give you the land. Now, I remember that ranching was suggested during Buhari's administration, and they kicked against it because these are nomads. And if you decide to go for ranching, it's going to be more expensive for them, because now you have to bring the food to the animals, whereas when they're moving from one place to another, it's free grazing. Now, if you are asking the government, are you trying to make settlement easy for these herdsmen, or what are you trying to do? This doesn't look like a blueprint for stopping farmers' headers clash. It looks like the government trying to give headers land. That's how it looks like. It looks like trying to make settlement, because if it is ranching, there are things that you have to put in place and say, okay, first of all, this is how it's going to be, this is business, this is how it's going to be set up, and all of that. But when you are now coming out to say, if governors will give you land, are you going to settle the headers there automatically? Now, the people within that community have to agree that they want to live with them in the first place, because this is our land. You can't just bring strangers from nowhere to start living and all of that. Land transaction happen in a certain way. It's a different ball game. But are you trying to create settlement in an indirect way or something like that? This is how it feels, because it feels like settlement, and then it's still not going to end well for whoever or wherever that community will be eventually at the end of the day. So I'm just waiting to see what is the president's plan. Don't just say let the state governors give you land. What are you planning on doing? The land is for what? These people prefer free grazing. That was why they kick against ranching. They want to go and eat people's grain and plants in the farm and go away free with it. Would they even want to stay in one place and know that it's going to mean more for them when it comes to rearing their cattle and all of that? But wait and see how things unfold and what the president is planning to do by giving a condition to state governors that they have to give him a land first for him to be able to settle these issues with herders and farmers.
Well, just like I said, Rachel, I just trust that the president actually have a foresight into this, and then he will do what is best for farmers and herders equally. Still on the Guardian newspaper, senators in for freezy session over Nige's 3 trillion naira budget padding claim. More detail on page 6. Open borders to address food crisis, Kano governor tells Tinubu. Revoke licenses of non-performing discos, federal government orders next. We saw that since last month, so you can find more detail of that on page 5. Nigeria, others raise concern over terrorism financing in West Africa. More detail of that on page 50. And I think a number of Nigerians are still canvassing that. Let us have the names, the pictures of the people, the companies, industries that are actually financing terrorism in the country. Man nabbed for allegedly killing daughter for money ritual. That's from the Human Angle. You can find more detail of that story inside the paper. And that's all on the Guardian newspaper.
On the Daily Times newspaper, the big story: will overcome challenges, feed our people, Tinubu assures Nigerians. SSANU NASU to embark on 7-day warning strike over withheld salaries. Market index extends bullish run as investors gain 403.69 billion naira. You can find details on page 5. Senator insists 3.7 trillion naira projects in 2024 budget unaccounted for. MFA approved 45 CBN contracts for wife. This is coming from a witness. As things are unfolding, you can find details on the front page and inside the paper. CBN's liquidity challenges hampering support for Naira. This is coming from the EIU, and then you can find details on page 4. And then we have picture story showing our Nigerian women wrestlers. This is at the African Games in Ghana, where we can see them with a lot of gold medals. And that's all the news on the Daily Times newspaper.
Richard, this is the second paper we're seeing that Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, that's talking about academic staff union, and then the non-academic staff union actually saying that they are going to embark on a strike. I'm actually being a little bit scared because we're seeing the second semester for some schools just started. So imagine the moment we see senior staffs complaining, non-academic staff, that is to say that the admin block will be locked. Senior staff, matter of time, ASU would say we're also going on strike, and we know the way this whole team mostly go. From just 7 days warning strike to 3 months warning strike, and then before you realize it, the whole year is gone. So I'm hoping that whatever it will take to make sure that we still have the session going, please, the government should do all that it takes to make sure the session is still ongoing. Well, before we continue further with other paper analysis, we would love to take a break. Quite a lot of stories we have looked at this morning, so we would love to hear your own opinions and your own suggestions and recommendations on how the government can actually tackle some of these issues or challenges they are having on ground. Please stay tuned with us. We'll be right back after the break.
Make your everyday informative, make your everyday count. Know your world, daily affairs, national and international, with authentic news events as they unfold on Global News and Zuma Nigeria, Monday to Friday at 1 p.m.
Thank you for staying tuned. It's still the Dailies. We have been looking at a number of stories on the paper, still on the issue of probing the Ways and Means money that was actually being issued during the Buhari's regime. And also we're seeing that the president have asked governors to actually give him land. So he will be able to tackle the issue of farmers' headers clash in 3 weeks. We have other stories on the paper where we're seeing that the president have asked those who have actually seized food to release it back to the owners, just in a way to cushion the issue of food crisis in the country. I'm Sada Elisha. I still have Rachel with me. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome, Sada.
All right, please, our viewers, do remember you can be part of this conversation. Please drop your comment, your views, your opinion on our Facebook and YouTube handle. Let's take a look at the next paper, which is the Daily Sun newspaper. Senate begins probe of Buhari's 30 trillion naira Ways and Means loan with the right the Senate President Tax Committee on thorough investigation. And the big story is still on the budget padding allegation. Akpabio's men fight back, plot against Ningi. Fireworks expected behind closed doors today in Senate. And then diaspora group plans global protest. More detail of that can be found on page 6. Tinubu to governors, pay wage award to civil servant. More detail on page 26. Gunmen kill man, abduct wife and daughter in Enugu. One murdered vehicles burned in Eboyi. Detailed on page 4. Federal government pushes for death sentence for electricity vandals and thieves. More detail of that can be found on page 25. I hope that will scare all of these vandals and then they will stop doing that. Also, we're seeing UK new laws on care workers dependent takeoff, overseas graduate admission, income requirement for family visas too. So for those who are residing or who actually plan to reside there, you can do well to read more detail of that on page 28. UBA African Guarantee Fund to support SMEs in Africa. You can find more detail on page 2. And then on the issue of security, we're seeing bandits attack market in Plateau, kill 7. More detail of that can be found on page 5. We have 2 picture stories. You can do well to grab the paper in more detail of any story that is of interest to you.
On Nigerian News Direct, Owa of Ibadan stool Osun APC insists new Oba illegally appointed, calls for reinstatement of Fomodun. You can find details inside the paper. Again, Senate initiates probe into 30 trillion naira CBN Ways and Means disbursement under Buhari. MFA awarded over 1 billion naira contract to family associates. You can find details on page 2. This is an allegation from a witness. The big story on the paper, power epilepsy, federal government to restructure electricity distribution, targets allocation of 1 discos per state. Moves to generate 6,000 megawatts in 6 months as power minister vows to revoke licenses of airing discos. You can find details on page 4. UBA AGF signed memorandum of understanding facilitating $100 million loans to SMEs across Africa. Revenue remittance, you cannot blame us for the failure of licenses. This is coming from NUPRC. Details can be found on page 6, and that's all the news on Nigerian News Direct.
On the Punch newspaper, federal government lament blackout despite 65% subsidy. One disclose more detail of that found on page 19 of the Punch newspaper. Pray for Nigeria to overcome challenges, governor tells the Muslim faithful. And on terrorism, UN begins Lagos Abuja airport security audit. More detail on page 21. And also we are still having the issue of the 28 trillion naira budget buhaha. Parties demand 3.7 trillion naira pardon. Probe northern senators disown Ningi. Ningi insists on the 3.7 trillion naira allegations. Senators APC PDP seek sanction and investigation. More detail on page 2. And still on the issue of the unpaid salaries, we are having Sanu Nasu Tako. Federal government declares 7-day strike. More detail on page 29. Commuters grown as one-chance robbers invade Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. We hope something will be done about that. Tinubu condemns farmer headers clashes, unveil Niger Agri Airport project, where we can see the president together with the governor of Lagos State and also the governor of Niger State during the unveiling. More detail can be found on page 7. We're still having President Tinubu renew hope for oil and gas sector with bold directive. So you can do it to look detailed into the directives, and that's all on the Punch newspaper.
On the matrix, ECOWAS single currency 2027 deadline unrealistic, says Olowe Feso and Wams boss. You can start with the details on the front page. Cole Palmer inspires Chelsea to Premier League win over Newcastle. You can find details on page 36. EIU raises alarm over CBN's ability to save Naira and offset debt, says it will take foreign borrowing to rebuild Apex Bank buffers, fully clear backlog of unmet for FX orders and restore confidence. The big story, fresh troubles for Emefiele, how ex-CBN governor moved billions of dollars from foreign reserves without Buhari Tinubu's knowledge. Investigator reveals Emefiele approved multi-billion contracts to wipe CBN staff companies. Senate moves to investigate CBN's anchor borrower program, 30 trillion naira ways and means, and others. As Ramadan begins, Sultan governors pray for Nigeria's unity. Shocking, Nigeria has only 55,000 doctors to attend to 230 million Nigerians, says Pate, and you can find details on page 14. President Tinubu inaugurates agricultural machinery in Niger, says Nigeria must feed its people, have enough for export. You can find details on page 3. And on entertainment 2024, Oscar Oppenheimer sweeps 7 categories as John Cena strips naked to present. You can find details on page 15. And on budget padding, I was misquoted. Ningi backtracks as northern senators disown him, risks persecution. Netherlands, India, Spain, Canada, France top Nigeria's export destination in the last quarter of 2023, and that's all the news on the Matrix newspaper.
On First News newspaper, still probing the humanitarian affairs ministry, knocks for EFCC presidency over silence on Edu and Halima. You can find more detail of that. Nigerians are interested to know what is actually happening to the former minister and also the minister that has been on suspension regarding fraud. And then from Ondo State, we have Aida Tiwa to declare intention to seek fresh term today. You can find more detail of that story inside the paper. The big story for the First News newspaper is on hardship. Tinubu begs governors to implement wage award now. Says it will provide more much needed relief devoid of inflation. Urges all states to adopt the wage award. More detail of that can be found on the paper. Ogun West Senator Adiola Yaya organized ICT training for lawyers, doctors, journalists, teachers, and others. Distribute over 1,000 laptops to participants. This is really a very good and nice move coming from the senator of that Ogun West. An issue of JAPA, where we see UK ban overseas health workers from bringing dependents. And in Rivers State, the crisis there, Wike's group turn against him. Backs Fubara, vows to fight him till death. So for those who have been following closely concerning the crisis in Rivers State, we're seeing there have been a twist where we're seeing that the Wike group have turned against him and are now supporting the governor of the state. Still on First News newspaper, 3 trillion naira budget padding allegation. Northern senators own Ninge backs Tinubu as lawmakers insist 3.7 trillion naira project in 2024 budget not traceable. Nigeria among countries with the lowest VAT, says EU and ECOWAS. More detail found in the paper. And also we see, I've survived 5 assassination attempts. Nnamdi Kanu's lawyer alleges. More detail found inside the paper. Ex-CBN governor pulled out billions without Buhari's approval coming from the presidency. And we're seeing the former president saying Tinubu has performed very well. You can find more detail of that in the paper, and that's all on First News newspaper.
On New Telegraph newspaper, report downgrades Nigerian banking sector's brand value. This is concerning Forex, described Wigwe as highly respected CEO. Naira relapses, falls to record 1,617 to a dollar on official market. Senate inaugurates 17-member committee to probe 30 trillion naira ways and means. And on hunger, open borders now to ease suffering, Kano governor tells Tinubu. Contract award, witness admits Emefiele didn't confer corrupt advantage on self. The big story, 2024 budget padding, Ningi in trouble as 7 more northern senators disown him. I was quoted out of context. A statement from Ningi says he spoke for himself, not for Northern Senators Forum. Ariwa think tank expresses disappointment. Charge him to court, Jimo Ibrahim tells executive. You can find details on page 2, 3, and 8. Post-poll crisis, Jandor expels Bode George, Bangno Akerele orders from Lagos PDP. Declares himself apex leader of the party in Lagos. Forum asks NWC to probe diversion of election funds by Jandor. You can find details on page 4. Bandits demand 40 trillion naira, 11 Hilux, 150 motorcycles as ransom in Kaduna State. UK bans overseas health workers from bringing dependents. UBA African Guarantee Fund seal partnership to support SMEs. You can find details on page 26, and that's all the news on New Telegraph newspaper.
On the Nation newspaper, padding claims senators put Ninge under fire. Jimo demands sanction, detail found on page 4. UK bars foreign health workers from bringing dependents. UBA plan $100 million lift for businesses raised for Ondo APC governorship ticket hots up. You can find both stories on page 4 and 6. Probe of the 30 trillion naira federal government overdraft from CBN begins. EU fault VAT system. You can find that on page 3 and on page 7. Tinubu to governors, pay wage award to your workers. President on full plan on student loan and livestock. Massive agric airport project inaugurated in Niger State. Only 55,000 doctors to the over 200 million Nigerians, says the minister. Varsities workers declare warning strike, and then we have conditional cash grant begins. Both stories on page 29 and also on page 7, and that's all on the Nation newspaper.
On Teen Trust newspaper, IWD 2024, NGO sensitizes students on gender equity and inclusion. Cradle to Harvard International School wins U.S. Embassy Creative Arts Competition. Nasarawa student acted as MTN one-day CEO. You can find details on the front page. We have a lifestyle column on page 7, for career on page 5, and well-being on page 14. And for short stories lover, you can find details on page 10. And that's all the news on Teen Trust newspaper.
On the Business Day newspaper, food takes bigger bite out of Nigerians' wallet. And of course, if you look at it, most Nigerians are actually earning to eat and not to actually make any other side hustle whatsoever. You can find more detail of that inside the paper as food keeps getting expensive by the day. And here we have an analyst that said, is Nigeria due for IMF bailout? This is a question, and I believe everybody wants an answer to that, so you can do out to read more detail of that. We also have other stories on the front page of the paper. You can do out to grab the paper in more detail of any story that is of interest to you this morning.
On Punch Sports Extra, the big story, amazing Amazon, 6 women who won all wrestling gold at African Games, and they are from Nigeria. Paris 2024, Falcons host Bayana April 5th. And on African Games, we have Umafia wins 3 weightlifting gold. Nigeria lose to Zambia, cricket bronze, and then we have Omoson Adegoke lead Nigerians 50-man athletic squad. You can find details on page 8. Napoli's Osimhen $1 million question. Chelsea judgment unfair statement from Pochettino. You can find details of this story, that of Osimhen on page 6, and for Pochettino on page 4. Pizarro linked with Kaiser Chiefs. Details can be found on page 6. And best for Eagles job, a statement from SN. And then we have stats favor Gunners against visitors. Barcelona versus Napoli, we have a 1-1 draw. And then we have Salah Reds ready for huge Saudi beat. At the downside of the paper, Dortmund plan to keep Sancho. Joshua back in training, ice summer fight. You can find details on page 7, and that's all the news on Punch Sports Extra.
Well, that's also how far we can go on the program this morning. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome,
always
Sally.
doing it with me.
It's always a pleasure.
Yes, and then thank you also to our viewers. Thank you to our supporters. Thank you to the crew members and every other person who made this program a success. Until we come your way tomorrow, please do have a great day ahead.